and to engage initiatives that create infrastructures for peace. Camden Rotary Club is only one of 220 clubs worldwide that have been recognized by the Rotary International for its commitment to peace, and we're the first of its type in New England. Camden Rotary Peace Builders are committed to helping us build peace on the local, national, and international level. We've selected the day before the U.S. presidential inauguration to launch this program because, as we saw earlier this month, our nation is really in a great need of healing. Some of you may be aware that President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris have invited bells and bell towers across the nation to ring out together on today, actually this afternoon at 5:30 p.m. East Coast time. This coast-to-coast bell ringing memorial will honor the Americans we have lost to COVID-19. This is another way that we can draw attention to the need for our nation to come together as a community. Today's program is the first, but not the last, on this topic of building peace in our community. And if you're interested in joining us, please put your name in the box over the chat box, or send either Diane or myself an email, and we can get you the links to join the Peace Builder membership. And with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Don White, our Rotary Service Project Director, to introduce today's speaker. Where's Don?
Thank you, Chris. Our speaker today is Stephen L. Becton. He's the Chief Officer for Equity and Inclusion for the International Educational Foundation, Facing History and Ourselves. He writes and speaks for Facing History on urban education and equity issues in and beyond the classroom. He presents at national conferences, writes blogs, and conducts workshops and webinars for educators and for the larger community centered on having courageous conversations about race and education. He's a skilled facilitator and experienced presenter. He leads a team of Facing History staff who are working deeply in these schools to create whole school culture and transformational educational experiences that would equip educators while also empowering students to overcome the systemic issues that have placed them at risk. Steve has an MS in educational leadership and a final term PhD student at the University of Memphis, where he is has research focuses on the historical construct of race and its impact on education. Walmart, CSA, and AAA, Bank of America, and Allstate are among the many corporations Steve has presented to. Stephen Becton.
Thank you so much, Don. Thank you for the invitation from the Rotary Club. I appreciate what you do in communities across the country. If you're wondering about my accent, I am presenting from Memphis, Tennessee. And I don't know how many of y'all, I'm gonna say y'all, have been in the South much, but that's my accent. But it's not a country accent. As a way of introduction, let me tell you about my accent. So my accent is not a country accent. I grew up in primarily an all-Black inner city community in Memphis, Tennessee, called Westwood, and then I went to Rhodes College, which is a predominantly all-white liberal arts college in Memphis. So if you take a kid out of all-Black Westwood and put him into Rhodes College, this is the accent you come away with. So, but no, in all seriousness, thank you for the invitation to have this brief conversation with you. There is no more important thing to be thinking about right now than peace building. So the fact that you're committed to peace building says a lot about your club, and the fact that you're taking time for this. I just want to commend your leadership. I've gotten to know Diane some through this putting this meeting together. And if you all are like Diane, I want to come meet you in person because it's been great getting to know her. Um, I want to spend a little time with you talking about this idea of fostering civil discourse, right? There is no more critical time also to be thinking about how do we have difficult conversations, because we need to have them. And we call them civil discourse. We call them civil discourse. We need to be in conversation with each other. We have to be in conversation with each other about the things that we face as a community. Just a little bit about facing history in ourselves. We are primarily an education organization, and we do our work primarily through schools and middle and high schools, impact the middle and high school educators. I do a lot of work outside of schools, but our primary work is with schools. In the simplest sense, what we do is we help, we use the lessons of history. We look at U.S. and world history. We look at these moments in history where democracy was fragile, where we were trying to understand how to make freedom and democracy for everybody, regardless of race, gender, class, where they from. We look at these moments in U.S. and world history that we can help students to learn from and make good choices today so that we can stand up to any forms of bigotry and hatred. That's our primary work. We're not a political organization. We're nonpartisan. We're bipartisan, non-political. But what we believe is that if we're going to solve the issues that we face today, we have to come together across these differences and have civil discourse with each other. This is one of my favorite quotes from Hannah Arendt. Uh, Hannah Arendt was a philosopher and a political theorist, and I want you to think about this as we enter into this conversation. However much we are affected by the things of the world, however deeply they may stir and stimulate us, they become human for us only when we can discuss them with our fellows. So Hannah right there is giving us a good justification for how important it is to discuss things with our fellows. And here's what happened when we have discussions. And I want you all to think about this. When we discuss difficult things, we humanize what is going on in the world and in ourselves by speaking of it. And in the course of speaking of it, we learn to be human. In the course of discussions, we learn to be more human. When you listen to me and I listen to you, and we engage in civil dialogue, even if we disagree with each other, we humanize each other's experiences. And what I would suggest you all, one of the issues we have in our country right now is that those who perpetuate hate, they want to keep us from humanizing each other's experiences. In fact, those that perpetuate hate would do the opposite. They will cause people not to see each other's humanity. And when we fail to see each other's humanity, then we're no longer treating each other with dignity and respect, regardless of our differences. So what happens when we come together to have a dialogue? We conceive of the space that we want to do it in as brave space. Here's a poem that I want to share with you. What does brave space look like? It's an invitation to brave space by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. It say, together we create brave space. Because there's no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard. We call each other to more truth and more love. We have the right to start somewhere and to continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It would not always be what we wish it to be, but it would be our space, brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. What this poem is saying is that it's inviting us, when you want to enter difficult conversations with people, you have to let them come in it where they are. None of us are perfect. As the poem says, we have all carried scars and we have all caused wounds, right? So in other words, we've all made mistakes in discourse and in conversation. And so we have to allow each other some grace, what I call grace. Give each other grace, because we all have made mistakes and we need to come into this space together and create it and work through the issues together. Next slide, is it? So what do you do in brave space? What do you do in difficult conversation? Here are some things you should commit to. Being reflective, right? Oftentimes we want to point our fingers to other people, but what we really need to do in difficult conversations is to be self-reflective, to think about our own thinking, to affirm other people, to learn to listen, share talking time, use I statements, right? Speak from your own experiences. If I say to you, I have experienced so-and-so, nobody can argue with what I say I experienced. That's not attacking, that's just sharing my experience. You want to avoid generalizations. When you say all black people are this, or all white people are that, or all people from the South are this, or all Republicans are that, or all Democrats are this. When you start a sentence with all, you just started with a generalization, and there is no all. People are complex and different, and there is no all. So we want to avoid generalizations. Try not to disrupt people, be honest and thoughtful. Here's a good practice I want you to hold on to. You want to challenge ideas, but not people. Let's just say that you're in a difficult conversation, a group conversation, and somebody says something that's challenging. Well, let me use, I just picked a name. Let's say it was Stephanie. Stephanie French, I'm just gonna use your name. Stephanie looks like she wouldn't say anything offensive to anybody, so I'm gonna use her name. Let's say that Stephanie unintentionally said something that was offensive to somebody in the room. So rather than attacking Stephanie, here's a good technique. You can say Stephanie said something or put an idea out there that was kind of challenging for me. I don't want to focus on Stephanie, but let's put that idea, that statement out here, and can we discuss that statement? That's very different from attacking Stephanie, but we're going to move it from Stephanie and talk about the idea that was put out there. That's a great technique that we've used. And work through your discomfort. Look, it's going to be uncomfortable. Remember this statement: the difficult conversations can be and will be uncomfortable, but they should never be unsafe. There's a difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. An uncomfortable conversation might make you feel a little uneasy. An unsafe conversation makes you feel attacked, makes you feel socially, emotionally unsafe, that you don't belong in the conversation, that you don't matter. Is dehumanizing. So there's a difference between unsafe and uncomfortable. Next slide, please. So here's another quote that I want you to think about when you enter conversations, and we'll share these slides with you. We ask you to grapple with the claims we present rather than strive to maintain opinions you already hold. So let's sit with that first part. Grapple with the claims that you're hearing. Grapple means to sit with it. Think about what you're hearing from other people rather than trying to just maintain what you already believe, right? And that's one of the problems we have in having conversations. We come to the conversations really to hold on to what we already believe rather than grappling with new information, right? So what does it mean to grapple? It means you have to be curious, right?
There's
Uh,
a FedEx package.
you
There
have
was
to
a
have
FedEx package
humility.
outside and I put it in the
Somebody
stairwell.
needs to read this.
Okay.
Okay.
Was it small?
Humility means that you don't come to the conversation thinking you know it all, right? That you're willing to come to learn, to be curious, and to be generous. That's what it means to grapple. It doesn't mean you're going to agree. Sometimes we just won't agree, right? We won't agree on things. That's the beauty of diversity, that we don't all see the world the same. But we can be generous and humble and listen. Next slide, please. So I want you all to read this along with me. You don't have to read it out loud, but follow me as we read this. I couldn't believe that I can actually understand what I was reading. The phenomenal power of the human mind. According to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in the word are. The only important thing is the first and the last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read this without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Amazing. Yeah, and I always thought spelling was important. So this is what the reason you can read this with misspelled words in it is that your brain is filling in the blanks, right? Your brain is doing what psychologists and sociologists call priming. It's pulling on previous information. Is your brain is also doing something our brain does, is making assumptions about what the meaning of this paragraph is. It's pulling on prior knowledge. It's pulling on stereotypes. It's pulling on all this stuff that's in our head so that we can read this. So why do I bring this up? I want to close my talk with talking about bias. Because one of the things, if you're going to have courageous, brave, and difficult conversation, we're going to have to learn to deal with bias. Now, hear this and hear it clearly. Everybody has bias. Every last person has bias. If you think, oh, Steve, I've done work on bias and I have no bias, that's your bias. If you think you have no bias, that's your bias. Everybody has bias. So I want to end with talking a little bit about bias and see if you have a couple of questions. These two forms of bias here are very common. Implicit bias is the one on the left. Implicit bias, you're just not aware of it, right? It's your subconscious bias that's telling you stories about people that you're not even aware that your brain is doing this. For example, if I told you I grew up in an all-black neighborhood in a single-parent home in Memphis, Tennessee, if I told you nothing else about me, your brain is going to start telling you stories about me because that's what our brain does, and that's that implicit bias. These are beliefs or attitudes we have about people that we're not even aware of because we got them through messages that we don't even know that we're getting. The other is explicit bias. Now we are aware of our explicit bias. It's very clear. We're very aware of it. For example, I do not like the Pittsburgh Steelers. Explicit bias, right? I'm aware of it. I own it. I know it. So what we want to do is we want to become more aware of those implicit biases that we have. That's where you got to do your work entering a conversation, right? So if you know you're going into a controversial conversation, what you got to ask yourself, this is your work. What bias am I possibly taking into this conversation? As I enter this conversation, how do I be honest with myself and say, you know what, I'm probably taking some bias into this conversation. And what is my bias and how do I mitigate it so that I can really lean into this conversation? Next slide is it. Now, here's what's fascinating. This is the form of bias that we do not talk about a lot. It's called confirmation bias. And what confirmation bias is, you all, this is very interesting. When you get some new information, your brain wants to take that new information and use it to confirm what you already believe. So once we make up our minds about something, even new information is often used to confirm what we already believe rather than changing it's very difficult to change folks' minds. So that's confirmation bias. So it's so important for us to navigate bias, your own bias. So what do you want to do? You want to tell yourself, here's a simple strategy. How do I navigate my bias in a conversation? Tell yourself to stop it. Just tell yourself, don't do it. You say, I'm going to go into this conversation and I am not going to go in here with my preconceived ideas. I'm going to go in here with an open mind. Just telling yourself that matters. Another thing that's important as I close, because I want to be mindful of my time, is that admitting that you have bias doesn't make you a racist, right? We made bias a bad word in our country. Bias is not a new way of calling somebody a racist. You do not have to be a racist to be influenced by bias. Bias is a kind of distorting lens. It's a product and an architecture of our brains and the disparities in society. So bias is there, but it doesn't make you a racist. It makes you human. You just want to mitigate bias. I'm going to stop there because I'm at the end of my time, and I know you have a schedule to follow. There's a final quote from James Baldwin that I think would be a good place to stop. Here's what you want to go into a conversation with. He said, we can disagree and still love each other. It's okay to disagree, but watch this. Unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression, right? And denial of my humanity and my right to exist. We can disagree. You can disagree with no other people as long as your ideas don't oppress somebody else, deny somebody else's humanity, or deny somebody else's right to exist. We'll stop there and see what questions you might have.
Steve, I want to thank you. That's a lot of information you packed in there, and
Yeah.
really appreciate it. So I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions. We got 4 panels, so if I don't see you right off, I'm looking for hands for questions for Steve.
And I know that's a lot. We only had so much time, and hopefully as the pandemic ends, I can come and spend more time with you up there and really unpack these ideas. But any lingering questions from that?
We got Bruce Cole. I see your hand up. Why don't you unmute yourself?
Yes, my question is, it seems like a lot of the difficulty in being able to talk, at least some of it relates to these information silos that we're all in.
Yeah.
And with people on the far right looking at certain media and people on the far left certain media. And I just wondered if you could comment on that aspect of it and what we can do as human beings to try to keep ourselves from falling into that trap.
Yeah, that is so good what you just raised. I can do a whole workshop on that, right? So we all go to our favorite outlets for information, right? But we don't go to those places for information, though. We go to those places to confirm what we want to believe, because we know what we're going to hear. We at least know what leanings is going to be, right? So we have to ask ourselves, actually do an inventory. Where do you get your information? This is really important as well. Who are you in conversation with? Where do you get your information and who are you in conversation with? If you do an inventory of that, and if those entities share your racial background, share your political ideology, share your religious background, and share your social economic status, if they share those four things, then you are in an echo chamber. You essentially just talking to yourself and hearing it back. Is nothing wrong with some of that. We need to be in community of people that share our ideas. But ask yourself, can I provide opportunities to step outside of that though? There's a philosopher that once said that you can't really believe what you believe until it's challenged by other ideas. And so find spaces and places that challenge your ideas so that you can think more critically. Thank you. Good question.
Thanks, Bruce. Greg Marley, I see you've got a virtual hand raised. Please go ahead.
To the unmute button. Stephen, thank you very much for driving all the way up to Maine to present to us.
Yeah.
I grew up in one of the most diverse states in the country, and I spent the last 40 years in one of the least diverse states in the country. So it's really easy to get into an echo chamber around racial issues in the state.
Mhm.
And certainly with politically, we do the same thing. And every now and then I dive into Fox News and some other outlets to kind of see how the same information that I'm dealing with gets presented. But how do we then cross over to begin the healing conversations of difference?
Yeah. So first of all, and unfortunately, this is not an attack on media. We do a lot around media literacy and know the importance of media. But I would also suggest, and this is an educated group of people here, but you don't have to be educated to do what I'm suggesting, that we get outside of media some. That we look at other kind of sources of information than mass media, because one of the jobs of media is to draw viewers and listeners, right? And to get clicks on websites and to get, you know what I mean? So we need to get outside of media and get into some real conversations with real people, really. So that's one thing I would say. And then to your more important question is, how do we bridge these divides, right? I actually believe that we give too much voice to the extremes on any argument, right? We give too much voice to the extremes. I actually believe that there are some 60% of the people are sitting in the middle trying to hear each other, and there's no place to have that conversation, right? So I am suggesting that you create conversations in your family, in the Rotary, in all kinds of, in your company, wherever you exist, and make it clear on the front end that you are being invited to a civil discourse conversation, not a debate. In fact, if you come into a debate for a debate or an argument, you probably don't want to come to this. We are actually going to have civil discourse where we listen to each other. I can give you some strategies and tools for doing that. But what I'm suggesting, Greg, is that we start inviting people to that, because the extremists, they don't want to come to that. They want to argue, debate, and not have civil discourse. If you just put the word civil discourse in a title of a conversation, some people won't come, because they don't want to have civil discourse. Right? So what you want to ask yourself is, what kind of conversation are you setting up, and how are you framing that conversation so that people can get the idea that this is going to be a little different, right? So that's one answer to that. Yeah, but believe that's what, because I do these conversations all over the country. If we look at the news, we would think that no one is interested, that we're so divided. There are a lot of people interested in that healing. They just not the loudest people. The loudest people aren't interested in healing.
That's a good point. Oftentimes the news picks the most extreme stuff out there as well. So,
Right.
Rich Anderson, I see a blue hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, Stephen, thank you very much. And have you read the book, Ezra Klein's Why We're polarized?
No, I haven't
Because
yet.
at the end of it, there is something that fits very well with what you're saying. In that, at the end of it, he talks about how we spend so much time on national issues, and there are 500,000 politicians, and only 500 that we're talking to if we're trying to deal nationally. And
Yeah.
and the key is to start getting local, and that fits
Yeah.
with your points of getting into conversation. And if you're local, you have the opportunity to talk with people. And
Yeah.
so it seems to me it fits very nicely with what you're saying.
That's a great point, Richard. And it's also the place where you can make the greatest impact. You know, in
Yes,
the
he very much makes that point. Now you can have an influence on a local issue, and so we should just focus ourselves more locally, and so we have real dialogue.
yeah, and that the reason I bring that bias piece so that when you see so and so come and say like, oh, that here comes that Black Lives Matter person, I know I'm not going to be able to talk to them because they radical and they won't listen. And you know, if you come into the conversation like that, then that's what you're gonna get. Yeah, let me tell you this. I'm a black man, but I'm middle aged, right? So guess who I have the hardest time talking to? As other young black people sometimes, because of the not the race different, the generation different, right? I grew up reading Dr. King and all these people that inspired me, and they didn't grow up reading Dr. King. They from a different generation. Sometimes I have trouble talking to them because I go, oh, they're not going to listen. They think they know it. All these young folks won't listen, and then they coming to me going, oh, here they one of these old Dr. King guys. He's not going to listen to us. They think they know everything, right? And we sometimes have trouble having. So we have to suspend that kind of judgment. Listen to this, even with people who are on the same side of the issue we're on, let alone people we disagree with. Who are the if you're on if you consider yourself a conservative, how do you even have dialogue with other conservatives that see things different from you, right? Or liberals see things different from you. But good points.
Thanks, Rich. Any other questions for Steve? We've got a little bit more time here, and I want to make sure that we make the best out of it. So I'm looking around. If I just miss a hand up, please just chime in as well.
I think I see Joanne's hand.
Joan,
Joan,
please.
Joan, I'm sorry, Joan.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could maybe just give an example of a conversation that you thought was going to be very difficult. You were able to turn it into a more civil conversation. You know.
Hey, Joan, that might be a plant, and I'm telling y'all, you all are not gonna believe this, but this actually happened. Okay, so in Memphis, Tennessee, as you can imagine, the kind of race dialogue I get to facilitate. So we had this conversation in Memphis that I was leading about the removal of Confederate monuments, right? That community dialogue. We had some pretty disturbing stuff here in the middle of public space, you know, Nathan Bedford Forrest statue, things like that. I'm leading a community conversation. Y'all, I can't make this up. I'm telling you the truth. A descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest and a descendant of Ida B. Wells. If you know who Ida B. Wells is, a black woman who led an anti-lynching movement in our country when women couldn't even talk in public hardly. But this black woman led an anti-lynching movement. One of her descendants, Ida B. Wells' descendants, was in this conversation, came with a descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who down here, among other things, right, is considered one of the founders of the KKK. These people are I see these people in a meeting together. I'm like, oh my God, this may not go well. Because we're discussing whether to remove his statue or not. Can you imagine? But let me tell you what we did and why it did go well. This is why the framing is important. The first thing that we said is anybody that came here to argue and not to listen and to have civil dialogue, you came to the wrong meeting. Some people actually left when we said that. And we were fine with that. There people actually left. But the second thing we did, I know this taking a minute, but it's so important. Well, we asked people before we even talked about the statue. We said, what are your greatest hopes and dreams for our community? What are your greatest hopes and dreams for our community? That's where we started. And guess what? Whether people were black or white, Democrat, Republican, whether they wanted the statues to go down or stay up, they all had very similar hopes and dreams for our community. And we started there. Oh my God, we all had these hopes and dreams. And then we were able to have this complicated conversation about, okay, what do these statues mean in removing these statues? What does this conversation mean to us having these hope and dreams for our community? People didn't leave totally agreeing with what to do with the statues, but the descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest and the descendant of Ida B. Wells sat down and had civil discourse about that statue. And it was amazing. They left and went to have coffee together. I can't make this up. They want to talk some more about it. So that was a good example. One went well, but it went well because again, we asked people who didn't want to have civil dialogue. We invited them to leave if they didn't want to do that. And secondly, we found first something, we humanized people by saying, what are your hopes and dreams? And that brought us. I still think in this country, we have some shared hopes and dreams. We need to be able to talk to each other how to get there. But I think we have shared hopes and dreams.
That's great. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
nice plant, Joan. Any other questions? We got time for one more. Joe Curl, final question.
I just wondered what you're starting a conversation around the events of last week.
Yeah.
As compared to the reaction of the police to the Black Lives Matter protest.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of talk about that in the last week, and I just wondered what your impressions are and where you'd start a conversation on that.
It's great question. First of all, I think it's very important to not put people in a room and say, hey, let's talk about that. That's what we usually do. Well, let's talk about what happened on that Capitol, at the Capitol. I would say what's very important, let's ground the conversation in some primary facts or primary source documents. That take a little more preparation, but it's so important, right? That we ground conversations. So when we want to have a conversation like that, we actually try to take an article or something that's balanced, but that really calls this out, but it's balanced, and say, let's discuss the article together on this issue. Rather than telling people what to think. Look, I'm very transparent and honest with people. As a Black man, when I saw those folks rushing that Capitol like that, absolutely. One of the first thoughts I had was, had that been people of color, they probably would have been gone down rushing the Capitol. That was my first thought as a Black man. I'm gonna be honest with you. But as a man that's committed to civil dialogue, that's actually not, I didn't call people up and say, let's talk about what would have happened if they had been Black. I called people up to say, let's talk about the disturbing stuff that happened at the Capitol. What all did you see there? Questions are important. What did you see there? What was most disturbing about you? I have some Jewish friends, colleagues that saw some of the anti-Semitic symbolism up there that I didn't even catch at first. Why? Because I was looking at it through my lens of a Black man. So what we got to own is that all of us, doesn't make us bad people. We look at experiences through our own lens. All right. I couldn't help but see what that meant for Black people. A person that's fearful of anti-Semitism saw that and saw that right away. So to answer your question, Joe, I think that we have to use primary sources, documents, raise questions that allow for anybody to enter the conversation from their own experience. but allow me to be able to say, I experienced that as a black man. Allow you to be able to say, you know what? I didn't catch that right away. I actually saw it as just an attack on our democracy. And who's wrong and who's right? Nobody's wrong about that. We see things through our own experiences first. And then we're able to say, oh, okay, let me think about this another way. Let me think about this how you saw it. And you could think about it how I saw it. Does that make sense? You know, and that's what we want to do. Let people come where they are, and then we can walk in each other's shoes. I hope that's helpful.
That's excellent. Thanks very much for that, Steve. I'm afraid that's all the time we have right now. I honestly, Steve, and